Today's program, I'm talking to Rob Ryder-Hill. Hi,
Hi, how are you?
good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Bright and early.
Yes. Right. So, traditional first question is, what do you do?
Um, yeah, it's a tricky question. I'm in a position where I play music a lot. I spend a lot of time on my magical practice. I write books, I edit books. Um, and then sometimes I teach people a little bit of magic, is what I do now. I spent most of my working life, 21 out of 23 years as a chef. I did about 5 or 6 years playing music. I've been a sound man, I've promoted a lot of gigs and a lot of parties and things like that. These days, yeah, it's a quiet, much more sedentary life. So it's the magic, the music, and the literary pursuits.
Brilliant. That sounds good to me. Sounds good to me.
It's all
So,
right.
yeah. So let's sort of. You've obviously got a very artistic bent in the way that your life. So, how did that? Were you already when you were very young? I'm assuming you were quite arty.
Yeah, I think I was imaginative. Um,
That's a good point.
Certainly like when I think about my childhood, I don't, I'm one of these people, I don't have a great kind of recall of that stuff. But a lot of the sort of stuff that does come back is just the time spent in local parks. Right, so it was the 80s. And so that latchkey thing. And I'm constantly quite amazed how casual parenting was in London in the 80s. Do you know what I mean? And like it wasn't safe. It was wild. And like we were very aware of that as kids as well. So you have this sort of like pack animal mentality. And then you're out there and your parents are kind of happiest if you're out while the sun's up, you know. And I
Mm.
was happiest if I came home with scraped knees and, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
benches under my belt. So um I think where the creativity comes from is the times when, I'm very, very ADHD, so I was also a nightmare kid, I think. If I'd had too much orange squash that morning, just bouncing off the walls. So the kind of the opposite of the freedom to go out and explore the world was the sort of the time when you'd get sent to your room and, without a TV in my room for most of my childhood, uh, or um, or the internet, you become resourceful. I think I have a sort of artistic impulse. I'm not like technically particularly great at any art, but like I don't draw now. But as a kid, I would be copying stuff out from comic books, or like Disney posters,
Mm.
just really trying to get as close to the original as possible. Um, but it's that combination, I think, of the imagination and time spent alone is where it comes from.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting. I'm fascinated by, you're saying about, you said latchkey kids.
Yeah.
That thing that you could just disappear off and it wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the case that you had a phone with you or anything like that because they didn't exist. Not, mobile phones or anything.
Got mine when I was 16, I think, and of course they were rudimentary back then anyway, but it's like, yeah, so until then, just open the door and out you go.
Yeah, yeah.
Once
And
we
of
got
course,
bikes, suddenly the whole of London opened
yeah,
up. Suddenly it's not like a 3 or 4 mile radius anymore. It's like how far can you go in,
yeah,
an hour on a bike? Like,
yeah. And of course, those things are really expansive to the brain,
yeah, yeah,
aren't they?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and of course, we have this thing of like psychogeography
Yeah,
within magical thinking,
absolutely.
where where the environment really pays, it really changes you.
Yeah.
And I mean, from just a purely logical point of view, if you're out and you go to different places, it's like doing the knowledge, isn't it? As a taxi driver,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
we
Yeah. Yeah.
we already know that ability to know um, details of journeys expands parts of the brain.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think there's another aspect with psychogeography as well, because like when I think about like how I do my writing, it's actually mostly out of the house. And there's two elements to it. And one is the sedentary bit, which is where I'm actually doing the writing. And that's going to be cafes, pubs, sitting on a coach, sitting on a train, something like that, where the scenery is moving around me.
Mm.
Right? And so I'm stuck, like chained to however I'm writing, which is like going to be an iPad these days. It used to be, little notepads constantly. Um, but when you get kind of like when you do hit a wall with it, you look up and something moves around you and it takes your thought on with you, or it
Yeah.
triggers something. And then the other half is the mobile bit, right? Which is a lot of what we think about with psychodraphy. And I think the sort of bit that you're talking about, which is the connection of narrative to motion, right? And so if you walk down a road, it's much easier for your brain to sort of process. If you sit still, your brain's gonna, and this is what happens in those sedentary moments, which is why I think it's the relationship between writing and space is the two things.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
moments where you sit down to kind of drill into whatever's just happened on the journey. And then, like you kind of intimated there, that ties into stuff that we would have both come across in sort of magical tradition going way back, but there's a group that I'm involved in that teaches you to um you pick a walk that you know very well and you do it, and then you come back and you try and retrace that walk, and over a period of so I did it to the end of my block in my last house, and I was there for 8 years, and once you've done it a little bit, it just becomes part of your sort of routine. I'm not very good actually at that sort of internal visualization, but yeah, there's something about, it's the way it always is. The more that we pay that observant attention externally, the more that facilitates the observant attention internally and vice versa.
Mm. Mm.
I think a lot, there's something, when I'm thinking about that sort of childhood imagination and then I'm thinking about art, like, one of the big keys for me is that sequence in Blake in, I think, Innocence and Experience, but it might be wrong. But where he's talking about, to hold the world in the palm of your hand and
Yeah.
eternity in the flower. And he does this list and he has this concept of the fourfold vision.
Mm.
It's this idea that I think if you're like gazing at a beautiful sunrise, right, you're seeing the depth of color and the kind of the emerging sort of tapestry of the light, and you're seeing sort of these like eternal poetic motions. You're also seeing like a ball of gas in the sky, and you're seeing the cycles, and you're seeing what we understand now about the geometry and the mathematics of that, and the relationships between bodies in space and gravity. Like the ability to see things at those different levels, I think, is what makes art out of craft. And it's like an almost alchemical way of thinking, right? We observe the process in one situation and then we see what happens if we apply that process separately. And we do the same in music. We do the same thinking on one level, like you're thinking about kind of, the harmony and like the right notes and whatever the rhythm structure is. And on another level, you're thinking about like what's happening in the narrative, what's happening in the room, what's happening in terms of the attention that's needed or the attention that's being given. Do you know what I mean? And all the
Yeah.
stuff that's like, yeah, these different levels of being able to observe something, I think, is what makes art out of something.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that's why, if you are somebody who's both fascinated by the world, but for whatever reason has ended up spending lots of time on your own, that slightly puts you in that observer perspective, if you're able to sort of speak from that position, it's fascinating, isn't it?
It is fascinating. There's of course, there's a lot of things about how we are wired up. and
Yeah.
built,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which we sort of forget about. Like, for instance, we're obviously designed to move long distances,
Right.
obviously by foot.
Right.
And that thing of, the Greek sort of term of the peripatetic, I was told by somebody who's Greek that that word didn't really exist as such, but but it means to sort of teach and speak, or teach and
Yeah.
teach, walk and teach.
Yeah.
And but this idea of walking and getting ideas, right? Um,
Yeah.
and that seems to be makes absolute sense. So the point about that is the very fact of mobility may, in some, because I've got, I don't know what the evidence is for this, but anecdotally, you get ideas,
Yeah.
and you obviously, if you're walking and looking around, you see things which you don't tend to do
It's
when you're.
stimulating, right?
It is, and it does that tends not to happen when you're driving along, watching the road. As soon
Yeah.
as you start walking that road, you start to notice things like, oh God, I never realised that was
Yeah.
over there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And
so
then the road becomes this eternal symbol, right? Which, in Buddhism, in many interpretations of the tarot, the sort of the idea of the path is like ubiquitous.
yes, and of course the thing is about thinking. We talk about pathways, don't we?
Yeah.
Neuro pathways, and I think that thing of pathways is really important in the way that we understand geography, but also thinking and place, and back to our
Mhm. I
psychogeography
think I
stuff.
think it's even deeper than that. Like I think that the fact that there is change requires movement, right?
Yes,
The fact that we like live and experience,
yeah,
the fact that we grow, the fact that there's anything to experience is a result of motion.
yes,
And so to a great extent, like indulging in motion
yeah,
is
yeah,
participation in creation,
yeah. No,
You can get
that's
trippy with like relativity about this,
yeah, no, but this is what I'm getting at. It's utterly fundamental to how we are.
Yeah,
And the interesting thing about staying still
yeah.
and then accumulating thought, that is obviously how stories are then told, right? Around a fire or whatever,
Mhm.
and that builds community. All right. So, think about the things that all the elements that make the human race, etc. And again, so going back to that thing of kids traveling and being outside, getting their hands dirty, moving around, running around, climbing trees, and all the rest of it, right? Or whatever it was that you were doing, or being out on your
Mhm.
bike, or whatever.
All of that.
All of that creates a more flexible brain than what we've got
Right,
now.
right, right.
Maybe a more resilient brain might be a better way of putting it.
They talk about plasticity now, don't they? That's the
Yes,
word. And
yes, and
that
that
sort
is
of like mutable,
yes,
but strong, but mutable,
yes,
flexibility.
yes, and so we've got that creative thing, and I think it's really good because I've never really spoken to anybody about this aspect of what uh, that sort of soil, if you like, of creativity, where you know how it comes about. So, was it the first thing that you got involved in? Was that obviously you were talking about cooking, being a chef? Was that the first thing you did, or was it music?
Professionally, well, no, I mean, so I played music. I kind of got shunted through various like orchestral instruments at school that I
Oh,
really
okay.
didn't want to play because I wanted to play, guitar or sax or piano. But the kid down the road was a piano virtuoso, so that was on. And plus, where were they going to put a piano? Yeah, I don't know. Guitar wasn't serious enough. So I got
Yeah,
shunted
yeah, I know.
around.
It's not a proper instrument.
No, so I had to play these proper instruments and this
Yeah.
proper music that I absolutely despised. And then eventually kind of like, just stubbornly managed to force my way into getting like a handful of guitar lessons off someone and justifying getting my sort of life savings out that I got as a baby to buy a first guitar, and it's like hard won thing. Do you know what I mean? And then I like figured out enough to teach to other people the chords and simple bass lines, and we had like a garage rock band that was awful, but noisy and fun. Do you know what I mean? And like a 15-year-old band, we didn't really know, we didn't have like a clear identity or anything like that. You know, we were writing the songs and stuff and playing gigs, which was fun. So that was the first thing. Cooking I got into by accident. I was actually a waiter. I love being a waiter. I really enjoyed that. And but chefs have a tendency to sort of burn out quite dramatically, often in the middle of a Friday night. And then if you're the waiter that's on the bar that night, you're the one that can be pulled off because all the other waiters can make their own drinks. So, and there's a thing about, it's a little bit like leprosy. Like once you've been in the kitchen, like you can apply for a waiter's job 100 times and they're always going to be like, we need someone in the kitchen, right? So I got sort of stuck, but it really suits me. The thing about music as well, but somebody explained this to me once about the kitchen, and again, it's one of those patterns that I've spotted that I look for. You're running a lot of different layers of processing at the same time in a professional kitchen. So whether you're head chef or whether you're part of the machine, you have to be aware of the whole machine, because any plate that's going out, you may or may not be part of, but you're very rarely are you going to be the whole plate. Maybe the desserts, you're going to be the whole plate, right? Even if you hope that you are the whole plate, not everybody's having that plate on that table. So between you, you're like orchestrating with, I've worked in kitchens with brigades of like 15 or 20 chefs where we've fed 1,000 people in an evening. The sort of level of spatial awareness to make that safe in a kitchen with knives and heat and the potential for cross-contamination and everything else. The level of coordination in terms of the time pressures, the specific, and you're doing that as with the whole kitchen, and then you're doing that with like your section because you're preparing plates for several different tables that have to be staggered at the right time with quite often quite sensitive ingredients that if you get it wrong, they're ruined. You know what I mean? And this is why chefs burn out and this is why they shout at each other, is because it's like you're basically, I've noticed I have the kind of ADHD that occasionally quite likes being very, very overstimulated. And I would occasionally like go and walk around Westfield on a Saturday afternoon to have like a sort of psychic shower and just come out like I've like white noised myself with people. Chefing if is so close to that in its complexity, but if you fall into that, you can't do your job anymore. Do you know what I mean? So it's just very, very hard. And if someone like speaks to you in the middle of it, you're just like, so like a well-run kitchen organization is almost silent, but for the cues between people, and it's elegant and it's beautiful. And the band is very similar to this, because no matter how perfect the system is, and you often idolize the perfect arrangement or the perfect plate, the environmental things, because of time and death and everything that's beautiful, are always going to be unique. And so you need to have the sort of mutability built into the system.
Yes.
Like you talked about the sort of the inherent nomadic nature of our kind of ape, right? And one of the ways that has been expressed is my cat. Sorry, Lux, you're
That's good. No, that's good.
she's getting, sit there if you want. If you want. One of the ways that's been expressed, of course, historically is in tents. And we've used tents as these mobile temporary structures. Now, I've been around tent makers, and when you build a tent, there's a lot of very complicated geometry, and you get as close to that as you possibly can. But when you put it up, you're dealing with like tension, you're dealing with how flat the ground is. Do you know what I mean? You're dealing with what time of year it is and what that's done to the wood and the canvas. Do you know what I mean? How tall the fabric is. Like all of these variables you have to account for. You need a little bit of slack in the system,
Yeah, you do.
because of motion. Right?
Yes.
And so it's this thing, and it's like the still moments in that we're talking about are when we try and capture the arrangement. And the motion is when you like test that still structure against how the world actually works.
Yeah.
I think about this in my magical web because there's so many systems that we have that are about prioritizing these like I think of them as mandalas, right? These sort of diagrammatic representations of how the world should look if we were getting it right. And all of those systems have these like edges that are filled with like war against the demons of the earth or whatever, because it doesn't fit with a constantly mobile world. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
but and we're so terrified of this motion and change and this sort of like, but that's the thing. It's like yielding to it. The fact that we are adaptable is what makes us incredible, and
Yes,
the fact that matter is adaptable is what makes all of this possible. And
yes. You
I
see,
don't,
the interesting thing here, and I know because we've spoken about stuff like this to do with music before, right? But
yeah, yeah,
um, that when we try to, because we've elevated conscious thought and logic to such a
yeah,
point
yeah,
that it actually doesn't really, it's not really doing what it's supposed to be doing. In other words, we've made a tent that does not actually work. It's perfect, but it hasn't made any allowances for the real world,
right,
right? And you
right,
see this in obviously with people who are practicing to play a musical instrument, and it's all about trying to achieve perfection. And it's like,
yeah,
well, I think that the the Muslims got this right when it's like, well, you can't have perfection. Only God is perfect, right? So we shouldn't do that. And in a sort of a Taoist way, it's this sort of thing where you've got to yield with, you've got to go with the flow type of idea,
mhm,
Um, and the problem with our thing about we've got the answer, we have it in the book, whether that book's the Bible or
mhm,
the codes of conduct for,
mhm,
when you're teaching at a university or whatever. This idea of trying to write down the stuff and be
yeah,
able to stick with to the word makes this sort of very odd, unwieldy, illogical thing. So going back to the thing about magical systems, and this is what I find really interesting when you meet people who are. We just did a taught some people some tarot yesterday. I mean, Minnie does most of it. I just sort of hang around and drink
mhm,
coffee and throw some cards and you
yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah,
get people to do sort of things I haven't thought about type of idea. But they all come in and it's like they've got the book, they've got the tarot deck, and they've got the white book. And you go, right, the first thing to do with that is to put that in the bin.
yeah,
It's like,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
because but it's because people want to have the answer. And it's because
yeah,
you know, it's been indoctrinated into them that there is a right way to do stuff. Um, and this is very similar to where we find ourselves with your first comment about, your generation and certainly my generation being left to roam wild,
mhm,
right? Um, to today's parenting thing, which is micromanaging. And I don't see, you've got very, very clever kids who are, got for the most part, good manners and all the rest of it. But there's something about the fragility of what happens when reality turns up. What happens to the tent that you've constructed, right?
yeah.
It, you know,
So one of the big differences is like how observed people are now, right? Like we had this whole world to explore, but we vanished into it. Do you know what I mean?
yes,
Disappeared. And
yes,
like even in the early days of the internet, it was so anonymous that
yeah,
you're just and it as wild as it was in either case, it felt safer because you're not under scrutiny. Whereas what happens now is everything is constantly under scrutiny, whether from peers, whether from parents, whether from like anyone who sort of has access to you through this kind of portal that we're on now, right? And I think it's the scrutiny that creates this like anxiety, uh,
yes.
you know,
Oh,
like
absolutely.
because
Yes.
frankly, do you know, I went for a walk years ago looking for a squat. So this must have been like 2009 or something like that. And walking around like Hackney Wick and Hackney looking for, because we knew it was coming to the end of time in the building we were in. So you're looking in the industrial bits, just trying to see which one's going to be unobtrusive, which one's anything like that. And I came across this amazing looking, like outdoor workshop. And, you know, in those days, I was very comfortable, like hopping over a fence and having a nose around. And I did. And I turned around the corner and there's the guy working. And he was like, oh, hello. And I was like, oh, sorry, mate. Amazing place you've got. Do you know what I mean? And we got talking. It turned out he made adventure playgrounds for the council, right? That was his job. He designed and made, which of course is like an incredible thing that it even exists. And, you know, I'm a chef and I'd been a chef already for like sort of almost 10 years back then. So I was like, well, the kind of the permits, the health and safety on that must be wild. And he turned to me and he looked me dead in the eyes and he went, the council understands there is no adventure without risk,
Exactly.
right? And it was just,
Exactly.
I was like, that still hits me like a train.
Absolutely. And you can take that and apply that to art, magic, music, right?
Yeah,
Anything that actually makes something happen.
yeah,
If you
yeah, yeah,
take the risk out, I mean, you've got to, there's got to be some risk there.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah,
interestingly, well, you see it with cars, don't you? Cars are really they're so safe compared to what people were driving, you know, 10, 20 years ago
yeah, yeah,
or longer ago. But people drive badly
yeah,
because they think they're safe.
yeah,
There's
right,
almost like a
yeah, right.
compensating effect.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't have to pay attention now. And then on the other hand, like, you know, I used to watch racing when I was younger. It's not something that I was ever super into except for rally car and stock car, right? Like the most dangerous cars, like your dad's car with too
Uh,
many mods on
Yeah, and a roll
it.
bar.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Just tearing around some sort of cliff road in Spain
Yeah,
because like compared to watching like Formula One it's about watching technological feats of impressive engineering, right? That's very different to me to watching like a human being like hanging on during a storm or like, you know, it's like just surviving the hairpin turn. Like
yeah,
that's to me exciting, you know?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah,
that risk. It's funny. So one of the things when we're talking about that idea of like getting things right, we have these cultural assumptions that are like Neoplatonist in the West, right? This idea that there is a sort of a perfect state, and there is an absolute truth, and there is a complete knowing of
yeah,
order that can be um, that can be achieved, right? And
yeah,
then that's expressed philosophically in the Hegelian dialectic, right? Where you ask every question and eventually in the fullness of time it's all answered and you've got it all written down and mapped out and you can go like, okay, I get it now, and that somehow will make you equivalent to God, right? And I think that one of the things that we've become aware of as our kind of perspectives on physics have got more complicated, as our theoretical maths has got more complicated, and as we've started to understand that like the fullness of the universe includes contradiction, right? It
yeah,
includes it's and so the dialectic starts to look very different. And you start to get something like the way that I understand the Deleuzian dialectic and what it does to undo the Hegelian is that instead of saying, I take my sort of thesis and my antithesis and I smoosh them together, and what falls away is untrue and what remains is true. You go, I take these two things and I smoosh them together, and in the middle of that, I collapse entirely and I change, and everything is changed. And out of that comes something that exceeds those prior states, that is bigger and more beautiful, but not necessarily right or wrong. You know what I mean? Just
yes,
novel.
yes,
Like, and that to me is a much more reflective of my understanding of how creation works on any level, um, including down to like my subjective experience of making art or playing music on a stage. right? The collapse moment is when the flow happens and you start going, I had no idea what I did tonight that sounded really cool.
Exactly.
That's
Well,
where I want to be, you
it's
know?
like Joe Pass, the jazz guitar player's
Yeah.
last rule of jazz, which is if it sounds good and you don't know why, just do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, it's that
Yeah,
sort
yeah,
of thing of like your map is not going to be complete because the map is not the territory, and blah
totally.
blah blah, right? Um, my sort of take on what you're saying there is this sort of thing about, ask questions. The answers actually aren't important. What you want is then for that to create more
More
questions.
questions. Yes. There's an adage, and I think it comes from jazz, but I got it through reading like the beat poets, which is one of the reasons I think it comes from jazz, which is theories for critics. You know,
Yes,
it comes later.
it does.
To some
It
extent, let
does.
the other people figure out,
Yes,
you
it
know?
does. I mean, there's actually there's um, uh, a documented thing about Beethoven and the person who was his secretary, right? Obviously a man, but somebody who
Yeah, yeah,
wrote
yeah.
down what Beethoven was doing, and they were out for a walk, and this chap, I don't know his name, but he said to Beethoven, consecutive octaves and fifths, is that's not a good thing, is it? And he said, no. He said, you avoid them. He said, so why is it in, your piano concerto, whatever it was, bar such and such, there are consecutive fifths in it? He said, well, if I put them in there, they're meant to be there.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And I think that's the point. It's like all of these things are only guidelines and not rules. And the problem with this is that because all of this sort of thinking, like the Neoplatonist type of thing, or just Christianity, basically, it's baked into everything that we do, how we think, how the law works,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and and all those sort of things of the way we assume things happen,
Yeah.
and we can't avoid them
Well, I think
unless, of
one of
course,
the things,
we don't avoid them, but we just have to make it take account that by default we're going to do something stupid by assuming something is going to happen in a particular way.
what's exciting culturally at the moment in the West is that a sort of life pattern that has looked very fixed, but for war, famine, bereavement, disease for several hundred years in one way or another, which is that, like, you work, if you're lucky, you retire, you have a family, you have a stable home. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
That over the last two or three generations has collapsed, like it's collapsed. And I think my generation, like what's happened to employment, what's happened to housing in the time I've been working, right? So I started working at 16, that's 97. So that's 30 years, right? uh, in that time, it's gone from expectations of career, stable job, mortgage, housing to it's not the norm. Certainly
No.
in the peer group, but I think in my age group, and houses that for in some cases hundreds of years have been single family houses, apartments that were built for single individuals, are now being chopped down into these, at these radical rates. And, we know what the right wing will say about it, but like I'm talking about people who I went to private school. I'm talking about people who went to the same private school as me. I used to share a rented house with a famous poet and a Mercury Prize winning rock star
Mm.
because they had to share a house.
Yes.
20 years previously, both of those guys would own very beautiful houses.
Yes. And
I was a head
interestingly,
chef for 15 years and could never qualify for a mortgage. That's mental.
yeah, I know. And of course, the other thing is that, that you were talking about squats. Um,
Well, they're gone too, right?
yeah, they have.
Yeah.
But of course, back in the day, all these great artists who lived in squats, who were being paid, the dole,
Yeah.
they went on to become, the rich and famous artists and musicians. And we had that
Absolutely.
period of time where the state was funding the arts through the back door
Yeah.
of
Really cheap.
unemployment benefit, and it was brilliant. But of
Yeah.
course, it didn't work for the accountants because it was like. there were all these scroungers and all the rest of it that people used
Yeah,
to
yeah,
say,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know. But of course, the Damien Hirsts of this world and the Tracy Hemmings. I mean, that's that's how we did it.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
because people used the system in order to develop what it was that they did. And now, of course, this is why nowadays, well, if you go back to the 60s, most rock bands had a Dave and a Ken and a Tony and a whatever.
yeah.
And nowadays it will be a Tristram and a Montague, whatever.
A lot of which is just because if you want to get together and play music, you've got to fork out 50 quid to get started, you know, because you can't go and play in a squat. Like,
Exactly.
I don't know what I would have, I mean, obviously I never became the famous rock star or the famous artist or whatever, but like I had so much freedom, my whole community did, in the kind of noughties when actually squatting was really well organized and it was an incredibly supportive community. And we had big, beautiful buildings and people were making art in like vast quantities there. And like the inciting stuff that has come out of London culturally in the last sort of 30 years, theatrically, right? If we talk about like Punch Drunk and things like that, the whole immersive theatre movement and the significant part of it that started here, and Punch Drunk is still running shows all over the world. Like that started with artists in squats who were able to build community to the extent that they could put on these vast shows. And there were some Tristans and stuff with the money who came in, but without the vast community of squatters and artists using those resources and those communities who had complete freedom to do really, really experimental, like radical stuff in a way that hadn't been done since maybe the early 80s. Okay. And I saw it like theatre, like the squat scene that I was involved in was full of people involved in theatre in different ways. And for me, like that's where a lot of my kind of like fool stuff and my ideas about narrative and my ideas about like what story and symbol is for all comes from like the games that we were playing, just trying to make London more beautiful for everybody, you know? And like you take that out and like there's no venues left, you know. We had a beautiful venue in Leytonstone that's been closed for the last 3 years. It was rammed every night, right? It's not correct. And I used to run these clubs and I know the difference between what we could I was a friend of mine ran a club that I worked at for years that was a 400 cap club that we were open for 4 of those years without a license because it was in the interests of both us and the council to keep the licensing up in the air because that way we could run a club that let in the Afrobeat community where you might have an audience that's 400 people from like the age of 5 up to the age of 90. Do you know what I mean? At
Yeah,
4
yeah,
in the morning and not have metal detectors on the doors or whatever. It's like you need the slack in the system because people
yeah.
know
You do.
that. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and those are the events where the new bands are formed and the new art is created and the opportunities are discussed. And you know, you take that infrastructure out. We have so this is why we have the word third spaces now, is because we don't know what a third space is anymore because we've closed them. Like, and they have been functional in like living memory. But if you're, I think, 20 years younger than me, you've not seen that,
No,
you know?
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know how they make art. I don't know how they make art.
I know it's bizarre. It's
I
bizarre.
mean, that's just going to be they'll do it because you know the flowers break through the concrete every time, don't they?
Yeah, but what happens is you need something that makes that, if you think about these the punk movement and and this
Yeah,
movement and that, they become the thing that people don't see coming until it's arrived. You know what I mean? And it's one of those things that happens on a regular basis, which is you're saying, the the flowers come through the pavement, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so something will happen. Um, but as I say,
We're just in a. I think we're in one of those sort of smoosh it together moments right now.
yes,
You know, where we're going to come out with something. It's going to be made of the same stuff. It's going to be a whole different shape, and that's like. It's kind of like, and the inclination is either to like kind of grab hold of it and try and control it, which of course, you know, people are doing on personal levels and global levels, or it's to hold on tight. And I think both of those create so much friction. Like, and the trick is to like go with it as much as
Yes.
possible, you know? And it's like, it's, yes, everything that's coming up culturally at the moment is as complex as everything else in human culture, but this like sky is falling mentality, which is
Yeah.
prevalent, you know, in the kind of magical community because these models include it, is like hurting people. And actually, like, we're at a very, very exciting cultural moment where the way for us to be able to make something new and beautiful out of it is to be part of that soft clay that's forming it, not to kind of rigidly try and control
Mm.
process that really is this sort of like flowering moment of nature, you know, among a garden that's, you know, flowers constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So,
You know,
okay, let's
because the
talk.
trick to risk, the trick to risk is to stay relaxed, right? If
Yes.
you're in a risky moment musically, what happens when you tense up? What happens when you start trying to think your way out of it?
Yeah.
You know?
Winston Churchill came out with a quote about courage. So, and he said the definition of courage is 10 seconds, meaning if you can stick around for 10 seconds, you're brave. That was the point. It's
Right.
sticking with the situation,
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah, yeah,
running, right?
yeah,
Not
yeah.
trying to fix things, just being there. And I've often
That's
thought,
also not running towards it, right? It's they're just like it's like take a beat. Like, and it really is like so often a beat. Like, don't just, you know, you
exactly.
don't
Yeah,
have
just
to do this. Like,
yeah,
we
be
need
there.
this energy when we need it. So wait,
Yeah, yeah,
no, you need it.
yeah. So let's talk magic then.
All right.
So when was your first encounter with the weird and wonderful?
So yeah, in that like child imaginative space, there was a lot of that weird and wonderful, from being unsure if I was seeing stuff in the back of my cupboard as a little kid to very deliberately trying to do the stuff that I was reading about Matilda doing in the Roald Dahl book, where she's like staring at the wall and trying to, you know, we Star Wars was the thing for my generation.
Yeah, yeah,
Just and you know, I was born in 1980, so like it was so culturally established at that point as well that like that was borderline like childhood religion for me and my group of friends. And so a lot of our imaginative play was in that world. And we would do things like, you know, earnestly sitting cross-legged staring at the spring daffodils, trying to get them to move and going like, did you do it? Have you done it? You know, on kind of like spending whole lunch breaks at school like doing these little experiments. And then you do the like, you know, the sort of the ones where you make people light and lift them up on your fingers and those kind of games. So that kind of stuff, Ouija
yeah.
boards,
Because
kids are
that's really
doing.
powerful stuff, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it really blows your mind that you could do that. I mean, a lot of the things that are
yeah,
sort of martial arty, you know,
yeah, 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 yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
getting people to lose their balance, but not by touching them in any way, type of thing.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. Or the stuff where you like you kind of make people unable to move their arms and things like
Yeah,
that. All of that
yeah, yeah,
stuff. Like, oh, there's weird things here.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That would have been the earliest stuff. The other thing was that I grew up in the church, and when my parents sort of started splitting up, which took a very long time, the first thing that happened was they got kicked out of the church that they were in for even discussing the possibility that they might, you know what I mean? And
All
my
right.
they decided at that point to go to slightly separate churches, and my mum went to a very Anglo-Catholic church, so you know, incense. We had like monks from France coming and giving guest sermons and stuff like that.
Come
Yeah.
on.
Absolutely, yeah, killer, like really
You've got everything.
beautiful.
You've got the incense, you've got the robes. Oh my
Robes,
God.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. And so inevitably I ended up kind of doing a bit of like altar boy stuff there. And then my dad went to an evangelical church, which was one of the first plants from like the big evangelical organization that has subsequently taken over, you know. And one of the things that happened there in 93, I guess, or 94, when I would have been 12 or 13, was something called the Toronto Blessing that had started in a Pentecostal church in an airport in Toronto, and was this charismatic ecstatic ritual, basically, where you get as many people as possible to stand up in a room, ideally going like that, so they
Yeah.
get extra exhausted. And then in a charismatic Pentecostal way, you rant about them about the coming glory of the Lord and the Holy Spirit, and can you feel it? And inevitably, because of the suggestibility of people, and of course, this is like really useful. I don't want to be completely cynical about this. This
No, 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 absolutely.
functions
Absolutely. Yeah.
But also it's a repeatable process that can be cynically performed. Do you know what I mean? But that came through, and so we had a lot of that. We had speaking in tongues, we had laying on of hands, we had that kind of like prayer healing and things like that in that church. So those two factors, bells and smells, robes, holy water, uh, charismatic sort of, speaking
Almost possession
tongues
type
and
things.
an
Yeah.
ecstatic experience and
Yeah.
emphasis on the Holy Spirit, which my young
Yeah.
mind plugs straight into like the Force, and like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, uh, and then falling out with the church because I was I didn't fit in as a kid, so I did all of the rebel stuff that a kid did, and that's not what either of these churches were particularly into. So once I fell out with the church, I was like, well, don't trust that model, but I know that stuff works. Who else is using this stuff?
Mm.
And then at the same time, of course, mid 90s, precocious kid, I'm starting to do like drugs and psychedelics and stuff like that. And it all, fits together to a very natural. And the media in those times, if you're a bit punky and a bit alternative, there was loads of discourse. Again, like we've talked about kind of boroughs and cut-ups and things like that. I got into, I mean, it's weird we didn't mention On the Road when we were talking about paths, but I effectively ran away from home at 16 with a copy of On the Road and a notepad and joined a
Right.
circus and like literally
As you do.
for a
As you
month.
do. Yeah. Yeah.
And came back convinced I knew everything. Came back having like done drugs, lost my virginity, started smoking, like, got in a fight in a pub, like all of this
Yeah.
stuff that I just thought was fucking while reading Kerouac. Like it was just like nailed it. Uh, that possibility for transformation, I think, which is also again, is built into the church in the kind of the baptism and particularly the idea of being born again, which in the evangelical church is the whole thing, right? Because it's a recruitment process. So we had one of the first alpha courses, which is a very systematic
Yeah.
sort of polite recruitment process. Polite.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
But subsequently, I've been around cults in my life. And they do the same stuff. It's all the same stuff. It's all the same stuff. You create confusion. You tie that to a personal crisis, and then you provide what appears to be a very easy solution, and then you've got them. And it's like, however that is done, you know. So I think,
Because that's an interesting thing you're saying about crisis, and chaos.
yeah,
Um, because that is one of the things of a hypnotic suggestion, right?
yeah,
That
absolutely,
a lot of hypnotic inductions come from a form of chaos, like a pattern interrupt of some
yeah,
description,
yeah, yeah,
and 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 it's that unfamiliarity of the experience that almost stuns the intellect.
yeah, yeah.
You know, um,
It wants an answer, so you can just give it one.
yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, you just plant something in at that
yeah. In
point. This
my
is what it
like
is, you see.
Before I was a chef, I did sales and I sold doors and windows in conservatories, and then I sold insurance, and then I sold advertising space in business to business journals that would be like 10 grand for a quarter page black and white ad. Do you know what I mean? And the training was like boiler room, Glengarry, Glen Ross, kind of, always be closing, use people's names. You're taught about mirroring, like you're taught all of
Yeah.
this stuff that is like, like the sort of like the dark edge of NLP
Yeah.
and
Yes.
behavioral stuff.
Yeah.
And you're really taught how to, really, the fundamental thing is you're taught how to create a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
And if you can create a sense of urgency through an offer, through well, what happens if you die and your kids are left without,
Yeah.
this or that, like one way or another, like, oh, well, that's fantastic. But of course, if this happens, I sold an accidental death add-on for a life insurance policy once, and it was horrific. This is a very cocaine industry. We had a big wall where people would cut out the funniest accidental deaths from newspapers every day, and we'd pin them up, and then the competition would be to see who could use that as an example in a call and still get a sale. Like so cynical, and so you so dehumanized yourself and everybody in that process. but you come out of it, and again, it's like, well, what I've learned here is like so many of the tricks about how a human mind works. When I took my GD initiation, part of the neophyte oath specifically is about not allowing that to happen. And that's not stubbornness, that's understanding how it happens,
Yes.
figuring out how to have a sort of degree of kind of self-control that means that you're not like mutable in those and manipulable in those states, right? As much as it's
Yes.
about, maybe don't let a creepy guy hypnotize you, or don't leave your drink unattended, or don't get more pissed than you can handle, that's all part of it. But a lot of it is about actually like don't respond to whatever it is people are trying to make you respond to,
Exactly.
which I'm not,
You know,
I'm not
and
great at.
interesting that you say that, because that's the sort of thing that one of the things I found so powerful about NLP when I learnt it was like when you start to realize how this stuff operates, and then you see well, back in the day, the newspaper, you go like, oh my God,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know, and of course, and now, of course, we've got,
It's like the glasses in They Live, isn't it? It's like suddenly all of the advertising, all of the way people are talking to you. It's like
yeah, and of course
things
now in
about the
social
creation of
media,
obligation.
things are so angled to what you do.
Yeah,
All the news items that you get go with what you've watched before, and then you start to think, well, that is what people think. And of course, it's not. It's just a fragment of what people think. It's more what you think,
yeah.
and it's being fed back to you, which again is a bit like mirroring. You're mirroring somebody's language patterns
Right.
back to them. You're mirroring the tonality of what they say, how they speak. And this one is you're mirroring the tonality of the language and the message. I think if people know that this is happening,
Yeah,
that's a start.
yeah.
Um, and realize to the extent that it's being used and how manipulative it is. But
I
so
think
okay,
one of the traps that happens there though is there's like it's like the Discordian idea of Operation Mindfuck, right? There's a certain amount of people who think that willful manipulation of or willful kind of destruction of these narratives is where the magic is. I think like these narratives again, like the narrative is always a stage behind. The narrative is how we make sense of things. Like walk the journey. Do you know what I mean? Like the
yeah,
kind of the imposition of narratives to try and like make something happen, I think is the opposite of magic. I think I understand how people are able to like, but I think actually, why don't you try doing some magic instead and see what comes out without you trying to cleverly write a story that isn't going to reflect nature. Do you know what I mean?
yeah. So see if you could elaborate on that a little bit for people because I think this is a really interesting point here. Because again, it goes back to this story, like I was saying about Beethoven, the rules and stuff are written after the event,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? So let's think about that from a magical perspective, because obviously you can get grimoires and books on magic now
Huh.
as easy as anything. And of course, when you started, you couldn't. And when I started, you
Yes,
certainly
so
couldn't, right?
yeah.
Okay, so let's think about what magic is then,
Okay. I
not what it
spent
says
some
in the
time
book.
doing that.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just
Yeah, yeah.
it's a poison chalice.
Yeah. I think so. Like one of the ways that I've been knocking this around this week, and I don't want to like the risk of saying like what I think magic is on a podcast is like people
Okay,
telling me in 20 years this is what I
you
think.
could always say what it isn't.
But I think there is something about like the way that I'm conceiving my magic, right, at the moment is again, it's that interplay between stillness and motion, right? And so the
Yeah.
still bit for me is in the construction of the ritual, the things that are within it, right, which will be down to like geometry, kind of the symbolic language that I'm using, what parts of that are where in the space, Um, and then the processes that I apply within that. So if there's meditational stuff, if there's like trance practices, if there's physical relaxation practices, if there are narrative practices like an ablution, and I'm completely deliberately ignoring the possible deeper magical stuff here, but I'm talking about the material parts of the
Hmm.
process. So an ablution does things to us mentally. We strip off our normal clothes, we wash ourselves, you submerge several times, you get out, you like fumigate yourselves, you put on some specialized clothing, like you feel different. That's doesn't need to be magical. So the stillness is in the creation of all of that, but I don't want to endlessly repeat the same ritual. And I want something to come out of my ritual that is novel, right? So that still structure then that I've created is attempting to create the circumstances, the set and setting within which something new can happen. So that if I have my ecstasy of a spirit, my channeling or my communication, um, or whatever it is I'm trying to do, that it's not just like that it's new each time, that I'm learning and that I'm being transformed, and that there's a developmental process here, and I'm not just going around in circles with this ritual. So the motion, what I'm trying to do is to create a still stable structure in the way that I use temple and practices. And then for that to be created stably enough within myself and externally within the space that I can collapse within it. And within that, I can take all of the things, smoosh them together, and come out with a new perspective and novel understanding, something new to express about it, something new to pursue more and better questions, you know? Um, and that it's those two things. It's having the almost perfect structure that needs to have slack in it, but one that is adapted. My magic is very astrological, so it's rooted in what's happening now and the variety of that. Like I've never done two rituals with the same astrological arrangement, even at kind of the most basic levels of reading, because it's different. So that has to be reflected. So you have like a perfect model with slack in it, and then you have like a narrative ape that collapses in it and suddenly sees a new way to tell a story. That's my magic, I think.
Right, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
We're back to our constructed tent with some
absolutely,
slack in it.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Constructed tent that you then have your shamanic ritual within, right? And
Mm.
your tent needs to be in the forest and far enough away from the city that you're not going to wander into Wetherspoons or Tesco's in the middle of your ecstatic state, but it needs to be close enough that when you come back, you can communicate whatever's useful to the people who are in Wetherspoons or Tesco's.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So, um, you're saying about ecstatic states, right?
Yeah.
Because again, this is something that this sort of come through the podcast, what you're talking about in different situations. Um, for me, it's almost that sort of gnosis thing where you're neither here nor there. Um, and that you can do that, and I'm quite good at doing this because I'm a sort of Gemini that dashes around and doing things, and it's all I get into this sort of automatic pilot thing
Yeah.
where suddenly something is different. It's like a gear change, um, and that's a sort of, and I'm lucky enough to spend some time with some shaman,
Mhm.
um, and you watch them working and they go into this altered state, and you can see them viewing the room in a different what room
Yeah, yeah,
room.
yeah,
It,
yeah,
it could be in a jungle clearing, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
the room, the space that they've created, okay, and they're seeing that in a different way to the way you're seeing it,
yeah, yeah,
and you can see. And again, this is like the NLP stuff with people in hypnotic trances. You know that they're there because they look different. Their eyes are
yeah, yeah,
different.
yeah,
Their
yeah, yeah.
way of seeing the world, you can see it's different.
Yeah.
And so, and that I think is not that dissimilar from people doing artistic things when they're in the flow. It's not the same, but it's not that dissimilar.
No, same muscles, I think.
Yes. There
And
is
I think I
something.
imagine that for a lot of people, there are artists who are absolutely hitting that space and calling it art. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
And I think it's that. It's not one thing. There's a
yeah,
multitude of
yeah,
things, but
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like a place.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
It's like another land with lots of different topography. Going back to our thing of what we're talking about, it's like this. It's a different land with different topographies, and but it's being in that land somewhere,
yeah.
you know, and
What people talk about, I think, with the liminal is like those are the places where they're almost on top of each other. Do you know what I mean? Um, Again, it's that I spent a lot of time I do now spend a lot of time in the woods, and like there are some woods that I know incredibly well, but I know I'm having a good day when I'm lost in the woods that I know really, really, really well because I've become fairy led, you know.
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
think
yeah. I know that. Yeah,
I
I know
think
that.
in general, like as magicians, actually we should allow ourselves to become a little bit more fairy led. We're very,
Yeah.
very cautious. And actually we should let in a little bit more of the weird and a little bit more of the getting lost and a little bit
Yeah,
more of the
yeah. Well, again, that's an interesting thing because we're talking about this thing about having the rule book, right? And you could
yeah,
even
yeah,
go, well, we got the ritual and it's in the rule book and it's this grimoire, right?
yeah,
And it's that thing of always wanting to be in control. And
yeah,
you can sort of go, yeah, okay. Well, you've got to have a certain amount of control because because you don't want the whole place to burn down, right? But in actual fact, it's more of that ability to have that almost flexibility that you're in that flow.
yeah,
You know enough to be able to be protected, like being streetwise.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Going back to
Not be stupid
not
mainly.
be stupid.
Yeah,
Exactly. Know the things that you could do in certain environments that will ensure that you're not a target. Right.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, so talk a little bit about your books. I'm just keeping an eye on the time a little bit
Okay.
now. But
Uh,
you've got some books and you've got a really good website.
yeah, robriderhill.com. And I do. I have three of my own books on there. All I think reasonably priced, but they're also free in the download section, which I get a lot of pleasure out of being a terrible business person. So it's important for me to mention my books are free
Yes.
and PDFs.
Yeah.
You can also
But the books are
buy them.
actually nice to hold. I
They are
know.
lovely, yes. So I'm very proud of them. The first one that I did is called the Black Chapbook, and I sort of mentally wrote it for myself at about 15 or 16. At that point where I knew, it took me a long time to get my head around the kind of magics that fascinated me. And they partly fascinated me because they just look like these opaque, confusing, elaborate structures. So what do you do in the meantime? And I think even, I do a lot of grimoire stuff. You do a grimoire properly, it's several months of preparation if you flow through it. This often can be a couple of years until you're up and running to do one properly. What do you do in that time? And so, we have a corpus of stuff like that, but I wanted to write something that was reflected my journey and also reflected my paganism and took out a lot of the kind of um, necessary Neoplatonism, with the stuff, the kind of the Christianity and the transcendental bias that creates these issues we're talking.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I wrote, it's a 3-month primer, sort of aimed at teenagers. What I've discovered is the people that are really liking it are either people who've, spent a long time in the armchair and they're just like, I just need to get up and do something. Or it's people who've had a bit of a break and they just want to get the muscles going again. Or it's people who've just done something really, really intense and want to just do something that's like playful and simple. It's a nice book. It's like £7. Uh, and I think it's what I'm also trying to show there, and what I'm trying to show in the other books as well is a way of thinking about ritual. It's just trying to be rational. Like use bits that you know what they're for, you know why they are. Don't repeat the recipe blindly, because if there's a variable out of place, you can't identify it. So it's often better to do something that's simpler, but you know what all the bits are. So trying to show that and trying to show something that is very simple that people can use and can have a satisfying experience with. The next book was a book of poetry called The Zero Principle, A Critique of Apocalyptic Reason, which I had the title and didn't know. I assumed I was going to write like essays or something. What I actually did was over 16 days wrote 26 poems ecstatically, right? So these are unedited poems that came sequentially, like word by word. I've corrected some spelling and I've done a little bit of layout, but they're unedited. There's stuff in there that I think I know consciously I would have changed if I hadn't placed that limitation on myself, that like I've grown fond of subsequently and found depth in subsequently that I hadn't spotted, which for me is one of the big justifications of this kind of ecstatic production. So it's 26 poems, loosely framed around the majors of the tarot and then the four aces. And there is a sort of rough narrative there. What I've come to think of it of being about is my sort of emergent magical identity coming into a sort of level of awareness, and that bit where you move from kind of observing yourself to like, I would like to have a little bit more sovereignty and to be making choices about my emotional responses and my behaviors. And what that means, if you've kind of been through like a very poetic and very magical set of kind of processes and ordeals like I have, I'm very proud of it. It's offended people. There's a lot of like poo and sex in it and stuff like that. I like it. I think
It's real.
yeah, I think so. If you like Burroughs, you might like it. You know, if you like Rabelais, you might like it. If you like Crowley, you might like it. You know, the third book is the driest in some ways of the lot, but this is the one where I'm really trying to show people how I approach magic. And it uses the 7-part ritual frame, which Crowley talks about, Skinner has talked about, Jake Stratton Kent talked about. And how do I apply that? And I've really broken it down to as simple a textbook for like, okay, grab a grimoire in whatever state it's in that you want to work with. Here's what you need to like pull out of that and arrange to see what you've got. Here's like what you now need to like flesh it out with. So grab another grimoire that's compatible and like find the bits. Okay, here's how you make that coherent. Now do your magic. Do you know what I mean? In as step-by-step process as possible. I put loads of cheat sheets in the back. My ex, I put one of the cheat sheets in the back and she looked it over and she read it. And I'm so proud of this book. And she was like, Rob, you can't give away the secrets, which for me was like the biggest. Well, of course I can. Yeah, brilliant. That chart, that table is doing. Well, it's a table, man. If one table can give away the secrets, those are not secrets that are worth keeping. Like, right. Let people have them and let us get to the magic. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's a good one. I did a really nice edition of the Book of the Law. It's a very important text to me. And it bothers me that you can get a really nice paperback from Wiser of the Book of the Law that's like pocket size, but I wanted a hardback and I wanted one that just felt a bit more like a pocket Bible, like a holy book. So that's on there as well. And then there's some t-shirts and stuff because I amuse myself with that sort of thing. And you can book me for tarot readings.
Brilliant.
That's the website. Yeah, I've got another book.
You've obviously been a salesman at some point in your life. Obviously.
Yeah, several years.
Brilliant stuff. Brilliant.
For my sins. And then I spent the last 20 years trying to atone for that, really.
Yeah, but it's a good skill. It's a good skill.
You go to the dark side, you learn their powers, and then you bring it back. And
yeah, absolutely right, mate. Absolutely. Okay, yeah. That was brilliant. So thanks very much. That was a fabulous talk.
Always lovely, like chatting to you in any context, Vic.
Yeah, all right, mate. Okay, so don't disappear. We'll say goodbye now. But all right, speak soon.